The wind moved slowly through the dry grass, carrying the smell of dust and the weight of forgotten things. At the far end of an abandoned field stood an old black horse, thin as the shadows around him. His coat, once bright and strong, had lost its shine over the years. His ribs showed through, and his mane hung in tangled strands. He didn't move much anymore. He only stood there, staring at the fence that had grown weak with age, as if he were waiting for someone who had long stopped coming back. People in the nearby town had seen him from time to time. Some felt pity, some felt fear, and some simply turned away because they didn't want to think about a creature left behind. He had no name now, no home, no purpose. Children whispered stories about him, calling him the horse that time forgot. Adults spoke of him in quiet tones, saying he was too far gone to save. Still, the old black horse remained, silent but enduring, as if holding on to something only he understood. Every morning he walked the same small path in the field, circling the same old tree that had once given him shade during better days. Back then, he was not alone. He had known softer hands, warmer voices, and the feeling of being wanted. But that life had slipped away after the farm he lived on changed owners. As the seasons passed, he was pushed further aside, eventually left in the worn-out pasture with nothing but fading memories. The field itself seemed forgotten, too. The wooden post leaned to one side, the wire fence sagged. The ground was uneven and full of patches where grass no longer grew. Anyone who walked past could see that nothing here was cared for anymore. Nothing was meant to survive long in a place abandoned by time. Yet the horse did. Somehow, he kept standing, even with weak legs and a tired heart. One cold morning, the sky looked heavier than usual, painted in thick gray streaks. A faint chill clung to the air, and the old horse's breath rose in pale clouds. He lifted his head slowly, sensing something different. It wasn't the weather. It wasn't hunger. It was something quieter, something unfamiliar yet strangely hopeful. He didn't understand it, but his ears twitched with a spark he hadn't felt in years. A distant sound rolled through the open land. Not thunder, not wind. It was the steady clatter of wooden wheels on a dirt road. A cart was coming from beyond the hill, pulled by a sturdy mule and driven by a stranger no one had seen in the town before. The man sat upright, his hat pushed low over his eyes, guiding the cart with slow, confident movements. He was not dressed like someone passing by. He looked like someone arriving with purpose. The horse watched the cart grow larger as it neared the old field. For a moment, something inside him stirred. It wasn't excitement, but a faint echo of curiosity battling years of numbness. He took a few steps forward, then stopped again, unsure if he had the strength to hope for anything new. The stranger brought the cart to a halt near the fence. He climbed down, landing on the ground with a soft thump, and walked toward the broken posts. His boots left deep marks in the loose dirt. He rested his hand on the fence, looking over it with quiet interest, as if he had been expecting to find exactly what he saw. The old black horse stood still. His breathing slowed. He couldn't remember the last time a human had approached him without fear or pity. The man's eyes were calm, thoughtful, the kind that studied things carefully, not passing judgment too soon. The stranger examined the field, then looked directly at the horse. He didn't call out. He didn't whistle. He simply watched, as if trying to understand something deeper than the animal's tired shape. The horse lowered his head, unsure whether he should move or stay. A soft wind brushed past, and for a moment both stood facing each other with silent recognition neither of them could explain. Behind the stranger, the mule shifted and the cart creaked under its weight. A few bags of feed and tools were piled inside, along with a folded blanket and lantern. The man clearly wasn't there by mistake. He had come with supplies, with plans, maybe even with hope. But hope was something the horse had learned to avoid. He stepped back, his hooves sinking slightly into the dry earth. The stranger didn't move closer. Instead, he leaned on the fence and waited, allowing the horse to decide if he wanted to stay or flee. The patience in his stance felt unusual, almost unsettling to a creature who had spent years being ignored or pushed aside. In town, a few people had noticed the cart heading toward the old farmland. Word spread quickly. Someone new had arrived. Someone looking at land no one wanted anymore. Some said he must be lost, others said he was just passing through. A few wondered if he planned to buy the abandoned property, although no one understood why anyone would want a place that had fallen into such ruin. By late afternoon, a couple of townsfolk walked up the hill to see what was happening. They spotted the cart first, then the stranger at the fence, and finally the old black horse standing like a lonely silhouette against the fading sky. The sight stirred old memories in them, memories of when that horse ran freely through the pasture, strong and full of life. They whispered among themselves, staying at a distance, unsure if they should approach. The stranger noticed them but didn't speak. He returned his focus to the horse, giving him time to grow familiar with the presence of a human again. The air between them felt heavy with unspoken meaning. The horse, tired but alert, lifted his head once more and took one cautious step forward. That single step made the townsfolk fall silent. The stranger finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You've been alone too long." The horse blinked slowly, as if the simple kindness in those words reached a place inside him that had been empty for years. The man straightened, brushing the dirt from his hands. He glanced at the broken fence, the lifeless field, the lonely animal who had survived more neglect than anyone realized. He looked like someone who had made a decision long before he even arrived. The old black horse moved again, another small step, his body trembling from weakness, but guided by a faint pull deep inside him. The wind picked up, pushing dust across the ground. The mule brayed from the cart, waiting. A soft rumble of thunder echoed from far away, even though the sky hadn't yet broken open. The air smelled like a storm was gathering. The stranger held the horse's gaze with quiet determination, then placed one hand on the top of the fence, ready to climb over. Before he did, the wind changed direction, sweeping across the land with a sharp wave of cold. The horse flinched and turned slightly, sensing something unknown coming. The stranger paused, reading the shift in the air as if it meant more than a simple change in weather. The townsfolk stepped closer, watching with growing tension, unsure what would happen next. The cart creaked, the clouds rolled lower, and the field seemed to hold its breath. The man took a slow step forward, preparing to cross into the field. But the horse suddenly lifted his head, ears forward, eyes wide, staring at something beyond the man's shoulder. Something no one else had noticed. The townsfolk froze. The stranger slowly turned, and what he saw shifted everything he thought he understood about the lonely field, the forgotten horse, and the reason he had been drawn there in the first place. The wind grew colder, the clouds darkened. The moment hung in the air, suspended and unfinished, as if the land itself knew that the real story was only just beginning. The stranger took a slow breath as he turned toward the shape the old black horse had fixed his eyes on. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The field stretched wide, empty, and worn, with only a few crooked posts and patches of dead grass. But then, just beyond the rise of a small mound, something shifted in the tall weeds. It wasn't a strong movement, more like a faint ripple stirring through the brittle stems. The kind of movement that made a person wonder if the wind had caused it or if something else had been waiting there all along. The horse stood stiff, his thin neck stretched forward, ears pointed toward the mound. It was the first time he had shown such alertness since the stranger arrived. His sudden focus pulled at something inside the man, urging him to take the sight seriously. The townfolks who had gathered exchanged uneasy glances. One of them stepped closer, leaning on his cane. He had seen many things on that land over the years, most of them harmless, but something about the horse's reaction bothered him. He whispered that the animal had never been this still, never stared with such intensity at anything since being left behind. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he watched the weeds sway in a slow rhythm that didn't match the wind passing through. A faint rustling rose again, a little louder this time, as if whatever was hidden was pushing closer to the surface. The stranger tightened his grip on the fence. His mule brayed nervously, shifting its weight and stamping the ground. The old black horse didn't move at all. If anything, he leaned forward, his hooves pressing into the dirt as though he recognized something the others didn't. The man's chest tightened with curiosity. He took another step, then lifted himself over the loose fence. His boots landed in the dry grass with a soft thud. The horse turned his head slightly, following the man's every move. He took a few steps toward the animal, keeping his pace slow and steady. The horse's breathing grew heavier, fogging the air between them. Behind the man, the townsfolk whispered among themselves. Some wondered if the stranger was putting himself in danger by stepping into a field that had been neglected for years. Others were simply waiting to see what would happen next, unsure whether this moment would bring trouble or healing. The man approached until he was only a few yards from the horse. He kept his hands low, showing he meant no harm. The horse watched him carefully, still tense but no longer backing away. He seemed torn between fear and trust, as though something inside him recognized that this man was different from the ones who had ignored him before. While the stranger studied the horse, that stirring near the mound grew stronger. A soft grunt echoed, startled and unsure. It wasn't the deep growl of a wild animal, nor the squeak of some small creature. It was something in between, something out of place for a field that had been deserted for so long. The stranger finally turned back toward the mound. He walked slowly, pushing aside patches of brittle grass with the toe of his boot. As he got closer, he saw the weeds flatten in a strange pattern, almost circular, as though something had been lying there, pressed close to the ground for warmth or shelter. He crouched and touched the dirt. It was warm, far warmer than the cold air should have allowed. Behind him, the horse let out a low sound, almost like a warning. The man stood again, scanning the field. Nothing moved now, yet the feeling of being watched lingered. The sense of mystery deepened, pulling him further in. One of the townsfolk finally called out, asking if he needed help. The stranger shook his head. He didn't know what he was dealing with yet, but he sensed that rushing in or bringing others too close could unsettle whatever these signs meant. Instead, he walked back toward the horse, noting how the animal's eyes followed every step he made. The sky darkened a little more, heavy clouds shifting in slow waves above them. A chill swept across the land. The stranger reached into his cart and grabbed a folded blanket, then stepped back over the fence. He approached the horse again, raising the blanket with gentle movements. The horse backed up a few steps, but his ears stayed forward, his eyes bright with caution rather than fear. The man stopped and waited. He didn't force anything. He simply stood there holding the blanket, letting the horse take in the scent and the shape of it. After a quiet moment, the horse lifted his head higher, sniffing the air, and took one step toward him. The stranger lowered the blanket slightly, offering the warmth without pressure. A gust of wind blew across the field, carrying the faint sound of the cartwheels shifting on the dirt path. The horse blinked, then took another slow step toward the man. The connection forming between them grew more real, more fragile, more meaningful. It was a moment the onlookers didn't want to interrupt. Still, the strange warmth near the mound lingered in the back of the man's mind. He couldn't ignore it. Something was there, something tied to the horse's past or the land's long neglect. Something that had been hiding until now. As the horse finally reached out his nose and touched the edge of the blanket, a sudden burst of wind shook the tall weeds near the mound again. The man turned sharply. This time the movement was stronger, more deliberate. Not the kind of stir caused by the breeze. It was the type caused by something rising. The horse tensed, stepping in front of the man as if trying to shield him. The stranger felt a pulse of surprise at this unexpected show of protectiveness. The animal had barely trusted anyone moments earlier, yet now he stood like a guardian. The weeds parted slightly, and for a brief second, the man caught sight of something dark moving beneath them. Not large enough to be a threat, but not small enough to ignore. He stepped forward to get a closer look, but the horse blocked him again, snorting and warning. The townsfolk grew restless, whispering louder. The man raised a hand, signaling them to stay back, though his own heartbeat had grown louder in his chest. The rustling stopped again, as if whatever was there didn't want to be seen yet, but the air felt heavier now. The tension grew thicker. The old horse's eyes flicked between the mound and the man, trying to communicate something only he seemed to know. The stranger gently placed the blanket across the horse's back, and the animal didn't fight him. Instead, he stood there trembling, unsure if he was allowing comfort or giving away trust he had buried for years. The man looked from the horse to the mound again, sensing a connection. Something in the horse's past might be buried in that overgrown patch of land. something that could explain his loneliness, his fear, and the strange energy that lingered around him. He stepped closer to the horse and ran his hand slowly along his neck. The animal closed his eyes, letting out a tired breath. The man whispered that everything would be all right, though he wasn't sure if he believed it yet. He knew only one thing. He had come here for a reason. A cold breeze swept across the field again, bending the weeds at the mound. The sound returned, softer this time, as though whatever was hiding beneath the grass was moving farther back into the earth. The stranger knew the mystery would not reveal itself yet. This land had held secrets for too long to give them up easily. But he also sensed that by coming here he had stirred something that could no longer stay hidden. He stood beside the old black horse while the sky continued to darken. The wind carried a sense of unfinished truth, a feeling that the horse's story, the land's past, and the strange signs beneath the weeds were all pieces of something larger, something waiting. The horse lifted his head and gazed at the man with tired eyes that carried far too many stories. The stranger rested a hand on the animal's shoulder, silently promising that he would uncover the truth. But whatever lay buried beneath that land was already beginning to move again, deep beneath the surface, as if waking from a long sleep. And the old horse felt it first. The stranger stayed beside the old black horse until the sky turned a deep blue shade and shadows stretched long across the worn field. The strange stirring near the mound had faded again, yet the memory of it clung to the air like a quiet warning. The townsfolk had already wandered off, muttering to one another that nothing good ever came from a place that whispered under the ground. But the man didn't leave. He stayed with the horse, running a hand gently along the animal's neck as if grounding both of them in the moment. When he finally led the horse toward his cart, the animal followed, though his steps were slow and heavy. Every so often he glanced back toward the mound. The man noticed it each time. That look wasn't just fear. It was recognition, as though the horse knew exactly what hid beneath the weeds, even if he couldn't say it. The stranger settled the horse beside the cart, wrapping him with another blanket and tying a loose rope around a post so he wouldn't wander off. But the horse wouldn't have wandered, not with that uneasy feeling keeping him anchored to the man's side. The man didn't plan on spending the night there, but with the growing tension around the field, he decided it might be safer to stay nearby. He set up a small campfire near the fence and let the flames crackle softly, casting warm light on the horse's dark coat. The animal stood close, his tired eyes blinking slowly as he watched the fire dance. The man sat on an overturned crate and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He had come to buy a horse, not unravel a mystery buried beneath an overgrown field. Yet something told him that the horse's past and the land's secrets were woven together. The movement in the weeds, the warmth in the soil, the horse's sudden alertness and strange protectiveness, all of it felt like pieces of a larger story. But what kind of story required a horse to act like a guardian? As he sat there, he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned to see a young boy walking cautiously toward the fire. The boy had been one of the townsfolk lingering earlier, though he had stood farther back, almost hidden behind the others. He approached now with a curious but worried look. The stranger greeted him and offered him a spot by the fire. The boy hesitated before sitting, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. His eyes drifted to the old black horse first, studying him for a long moment before turning back to the stranger. He admitted quietly that he had seen something earlier, something he didn't tell the others. The man leaned in, listening closely. The boy explained that he had been watching the mound long before the stranger arrived. Several times over the past week he noticed the weeds shift when the air was perfectly still. At first he thought it might be a stray animal digging or resting, but the movements were too slow and heavy for something small. He had tried telling the adults, but no one believed him. They thought he just wanted attention or had let his imagination get the best of him. The stranger asked the boy what he thought was under there. The boy hesitated again, glancing toward the horse. He said he didn't know for sure, but he felt certain the horse knew. The way he stared at the mound wasn't the stare of fear, the boy said. It was the stare of memory. The stranger looked at the horse and felt the truth in those words. The horse had been left alone on this land for too long, abandoned by whoever once owned it. Maybe he had watched something happen here, something he couldn't forget. The boy leaned closer to the fire and spoke softer. He mentioned that before the horse was left here, he often saw a wagon come and go late in the evenings. It wasn't a local wagon. He remembered the wheels had a strange pattern, and the horses pulling it were thin and uneasy. The wagon always stopped near the mound. There were nights, the boy claimed, when he heard muffled noises coming from where the wagon parked, followed by long stretches of silence. The stranger listened without interrupting. Each detail layered onto the mystery, making the story darker and more tangled. The stranger asked if the boy ever saw the people who used the wagon. The boy shook his head. They always came when the light was low, faces hidden under wide hats or dark coats. The stranger felt a chill settle in his chest. Something about the boy's descriptions didn't sit right. It suggested the mound wasn't a natural resting place for wildlife. It might be something left behind by those secretive visitors. The child suddenly looked nervous, as though realizing he had said too much. He stood up quickly and brushed dust off his pants. He told the stranger he should get home before his family noticed he was gone. Before leaving, he whispered one last thing. He said the horse only started showing signs of panic after the wagon stopped coming. Whatever the visitors left behind, the horse had been watching over it ever since. The stranger thanked the boy, and the child ran off, disappearing into the dim path leading back toward town. The man sat there for a long moment, turning the boy's words over in his mind. The horse shifted beside him and let out a soft breath, almost as if he knew the stranger now understood a part of his burden. The man reached up and rested a hand against the horse's jaw. The animal leaned into the touch, seeking comfort but offering a silent warning too. When the fire burned low, the stranger moved to check the mound again. He stepped over the fence and crossed the field until the tall weeds brushed against his legs. The air felt heavier here, and a faint warmth still clung to the soil. He knelt and placed his palm flat on the ground. It felt as if something was pulsing beneath it, slow and steady. Not alive in the way an animal might be, but alive in the sense that it wasn't done with the world. Standing again, he took a careful step back. The horse watched his every move from across the fence, ears pinned forward, breathing tense. The man returned to the fire and stayed awake long into the night, unsure whether the darkness would stay quiet or burst open with whatever hid under the earth. As the first light of morning pushed over the horizon, the stranger heard distant voices. A group of townsfolk approached the field, some carrying tools, some carrying lanterns even though the sun was rising. Their faces showed a mix of anger and fear. They said rumors had spread overnight that something was wrong here. Some thought the land was cursed. Others believed the stranger had stirred up danger by stepping onto ground better left untouched. The stranger stood calmly, but he knew he couldn't stop them if they tried to uncover the mound by force. He explained that he still didn't know what lay beneath, only that it wasn't something to disturb carelessly. The crowd murmured, not convinced. The horse suddenly stepped closer to the fence, snorting sharply at them. The sound froze the crowd. His stance was protective, even fierce. A few of the men shifted back, uneasy under the horse's steady stare. They whispered that the animal had changed overnight, as if claiming the stranger as his rightful guardian and warning anyone who approached too quickly. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She wasn't angry like the others, but her face held worry. She said the land had been strange before the horse was abandoned there, though no one wanted to admit it. She spoke of old stories, of buried things and forgotten deals. Her voice trembled as she asked the stranger what he planned to do now. He told her the truth. He didn't know yet, but he wouldn't leave until he found answers, and he wouldn't allow the horse to face whatever danger lingered here alone. The woman nodded slowly, though fear still etched her expression. She turned back to the crowd, urging them to leave the stranger to his task. She said pushing the land too hard might provoke something they weren't prepared for. Reluctantly, the group pulled away. One by one, they left the field, though their eyes kept drifting back as if expecting the mound to rise at any moment. When they were gone, the man let out a slow breath. The old black horse nudged his shoulder, tired yet trusting. The connection between them had deepened overnight, though the mystery surrounding the field had only grown thicker. The stranger knew one thing for certain. Whatever lay beneath that mound wasn't done waking up. And the horse, with all his worn strength and quiet fear, understood its meaning far better than any human could. The real conflict was only beginning. The night after the storm passed, the valley carried a strange quiet. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy rather than peaceful, as if the land itself were waiting for something to break it. The farmer sensed it before he even stepped out of his cabin. He lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling and listening to the old black horse shift inside the stable. The sound was faint, a slow tap of a hoof or the rustle of hay, yet it reached him in a way nothing else did. It wasn't worry that kept him awake, but a strange pull, as if the horse's troubles were now woven into his own. When he finally went outside, the air was cold enough to sting his lungs. The lantern he carried threw a soft glow along the path, lighting the frost on the ground. He walked toward the stable, and halfway there he paused. Something had changed. The old black horse wasn't restless. There was no shuffle, no stomp, no sound at all. The farmer stepped inside and found the horse standing still, head lowered, eyes half closed. Not in fear this time. More like the horse was sinking into thoughts it didn't want to share. He reached out with a slow hand, brushing along the animal's neck. The horse didn't flinch, but the farmer could feel the tension beneath the coat. It was a different kind of tension than before. Not fear of people, not a memory of pain. It felt like the horse sensed something coming. The farmer didn't know what to make of that feeling, yet he felt it too. He spent that morning checking fence lines and walking the edges of his land. Tracks he didn't recognize ran along the backside of his property, not from wild animals. They were deeper and spaced too evenly, like someone had been circling the place. He knelt and pressed his fingers into one of the prints. The soil had been pushed down recently. Whoever it was had been there during the storm or right after it. He rose slowly and looked toward the distant tree line. A light fog still clung to the ground, making the trees look like tall shadows. He stood there longer than he meant to, trying to make sense of why anyone would be watching his land. It wasn't worth much. There were no crops to steal, no equipment lying around, nothing but the cabin, a worn stable, and the old black horse that folks in town thought should have been put down long ago. Whoever left those prints had no reason to care about anything here, unless they were after the horse. That idea dug deeper into him the longer he thought about it. The horse's scars, the fear in its eyes, the way it kept glancing toward distant sounds. Maybe its past wasn't just sad but dangerous. Maybe it had belonged to someone who wouldn't let go easily. Later that day, as he brushed the horse down, he spoke to it the way he always did. Quietly, without expecting any response. But the horse lifted its head suddenly, ears pointed forward, eyes fixed on something beyond the open stable door. The farmer turned fast, thinking someone stood there, yet no one did. He stepped outside and scanned the fields. Nothing moved except a crow landing on the fence post. The horse kept staring, muscles tight, nostrils flared. The farmer placed a hand on its neck, trying to calm it, but the horse wouldn't ease up. Its breathing turned sharp, like it recognized a scent carried on the wind. The farmer tried to convince himself it was just old memories rising up again. Yet the tracks he'd found earlier had already planted a different thought in his mind. What if the horse sensed something he couldn't see? A few days passed, each one carrying a strange tension. The horse recovered faster than expected. Its steps grew stronger, its coat started to regain shine, and its eyes held a bit more life. The farmer felt proud watching it change, but the stronger the horse became, the more trouble seemed to gather around the farm. He began hearing distant sounds during the night, sounds too steady to be nature. Metal clinking, wood snapping, footsteps hushed in the dark. One night, he woke to the horse whinnying in a way he had never heard before. It wasn't fear or pain, it was warning. He jumped from his bed, grabbed his lantern, and rushed outside without even tying his boots. The wind cut across the yard as he ran toward the stable. He expected to see someone near the door. Instead, he found the horse pacing in its stall, eyes fixed on the far fields again. The farmer felt the wind shift. Somewhere far off, a faint flicker of light appeared, then vanished. It could have been a lantern, it could have been lightning. But there were no clouds in the sky, and the light looked too purposeful. He stayed there a long time, hand resting on the stall door, listening. The night didn't give him answers, only silence broken by the horse's sharp breaths. He hardly slept after that. Every sound outside made him sit up. Every morning he checked the fence lines again. And every day more signs showed up around the property. A broken twig, a boot print near the creek, the faint shape of something pressed into the dirt beside the path. Someone was watching, waiting. Not rushing, not hiding signs on purpose, as if they didn't fear being noticed. He started wondering what kind of person would follow an old black horse this far. The horse was still weak compared to what it must have been in its prime. Its body carried so many marks of mistreatment that it seemed no one would want it back for anything good. Yet the signs on the ground didn't lie. Someone wanted it. Someone was getting closer. One afternoon, while fixing a loose board on the stable, the farmer found a thin rope tangled in the brush near the back corner of the barn. It wasn't his rope. He hadn't used anything like it since moving there. The rope had been cut clean, not frayed or torn. Almost as if someone had been planning something, then changed their mind and left in a hurry. The farmer held it in his hands and felt something cold move through him. Someone had been close enough to see the stable, close enough to reach the horse if they wanted. He kept the discovery to himself. There were no neighbors nearby to talk to anyway, and the town was too far for casual trips. Besides, he didn't have enough proof to make sense of the situation yet. He only had fear growing inside him and a horse whose past refused to fade. The old black horse grew uneasy as days passed. It would lift its head suddenly and twist its ears toward faint sounds. Sometimes it refused to drink water until the farmer stood near. At other times, it would stand near the stall door and stare at the yard as if expecting someone to appear. The farmer fed it more often, brushed it more carefully, trying to calm it with routine. But the horse knew something he didn't. One morning, while leading the horse into the field for some light walking, the farmer noticed the trees at the edge of his property swaying in a strange pattern. The wind was mild, yet the branches moved too much. He stopped walking, keeping a steady hand on the reins. The horse stiffened instantly. The farmer narrowed his eyes, trying to spot any movement between the trunks. The shadows looked normal, yet he felt watched again. He backed up slowly, guiding the horse into the stable. Once inside, he shut the door quietly and stepped out the side window to keep an eye on the trees. The branches moved lightly now, swaying in a calm rhythm. Nothing seemed wrong. Yet the tension grew inside him in a way he couldn't ignore. He went inside his cabin and took out an old map of the area. He traced the borders of his land, then the path leading in from the north. If someone were approaching from that direction, they would have to pass near the creek, where he found tracks earlier. He stared at the map and realized that whoever was coming knew the land well enough not to be caught easily. As evening settled, he prepared the cabin as if expecting company. He didn't know why. It wasn't fear, but instinct. The old black horse reacted the same way, pacing inside its stall, breathing hard, watching the windows. Something was coming. Something that had been building for days. The wind grew stronger that night. Shadows shifted along the yard. And somewhere beyond the tree line, branches snapped in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Not the wind, not an animal. Something moving closer. The farmer took a deep breath and stepped outside, lantern in hand. The horse let out a low, urgent sound that chilled the air around him. He turned toward the sound of footsteps drawing near, steady and sure, as if whoever approached had no intention of hiding anymore. The lantern trembled slightly in his grip as he walked forward, each step pulling him into the thick tension filling the night. He reached the edge of the yard and stopped. The shadows ahead shifted. Someone stood there. He couldn't see the face or the shape clearly, only the outline of a figure waiting just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow. The horse cried out from the stable. The wind pushed back against him, and the figure took one silent step forward. The farmer held the lantern steady, though his hand felt heavier than usual. The figure ahead seemed to blend into the darkness, but he could tell by its stance that it had been waiting there for some time. The old black horse let out another sharp cry from the stable, a sound filled with warning and fear at the same time. The farmer swallowed hard and stepped forward until the light reached a little farther across the yard. The figure stopped moving, as if measuring the farmer's reaction. The lantern glow caught the edge of a coat sleeve and the faint outline of a worn hat. The farmer didn't recognize the person, yet something in the way the stranger stood made it clear this visit had nothing to do with the land or the cabin. It was the horse. It had always been about the horse. The farmer set the lantern down on a fence post and forced his voice to stay steady. He called out, asking what the stranger wanted on his property. The figure shifted slightly, enough for the farmer to sense tension rather than aggression. After a quiet moment, the stranger spoke in a rough voice, explaining that he had been searching for the old black horse for months. He said the horse had once worked on a small ranch that belonged to his brother, a man who didn't believe in treating animals well. The farmer listened quietly as the stranger described a life of long days, heavy work, and constant pressure, all placed on the horse without care or rest. The stranger admitted that he left the ranch after too many disagreements about how the animals were treated. He came back one day to find the horse gone. His brother claimed it had wandered off, but the stranger never believed him. He suspected the horse had been sold to someone who didn't know or care about its past. Ever since, he searched through different towns, following bits of news about a worn-out black horse that seemed frightened and lonely wherever it ended up. The farmer felt a slow shift in his understanding. The horse had not simply been abandoned. It had lived through a long chain of hands and places, never finding a place where it was safe. The stranger's voice wavered as he explained that he only wanted to know the horse was alive. He said he had tracked its trail for weeks and recognized the wounds and marks described by people who had briefly taken care of it. He said he never meant to cause fear, only to find the animal he had once tried to protect. The farmer looked back toward the stable. The horse stood inside, breathing loudly, ears forward, eyes fixed on the stranger's shadow. Something softened the horse's posture, as if it remembered a distant sound or tone. The farmer stepped closer to the stable and opened the door. The horse hesitated, not in fear but uncertainty. It took a few careful steps forward, then stopped at the doorway. The stranger stayed completely still. He didn't reach out or call to the animal. He lowered his head slightly, letting the horse decide what to do. The farmer watched as the old black horse lifted its head, breathing in the air around the stranger. The tension in its body eased little by little. After a long moment, the horse walked toward the fence, standing close enough for the lantern light to touch its coat. The stranger took a slow step forward. The horse didn't back away. It sniffed the air, then lowered its head, touching the stranger's sleeve. The man let out a shaky breath and placed a gentle hand on the horse's neck. His voice trembled as he told the horse he was sorry for not being able to protect it before. He said he never wanted to take it away, only make sure it was safe. The farmer felt the weight lift from the night. The tension that had followed him for weeks faded like smoke in the wind. He asked the stranger what he planned to do now that he had found the horse. The man replied that he had no intention of taking the animal away if it didn't want to go. He said the horse looked healthier, calmer, and stronger than he had ever seen it. He admitted that the farmer had done more for the horse in a short time than anyone else had done in years. They walked to the stable together, letting the horse lead the way. Once inside, the horse stood between them, calm and steady. The stranger ran his hand across the horse's back with care, noting how much the animal had recovered. He told the farmer that the horse deserved a quiet life, one filled with steady days and open fields rather than constant work. He said he hoped the farmer would keep it if he was willing. The farmer nodded. He didn't need to think twice. He had grown attached to the horse in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't just an animal to him anymore. It was part of the land, part of his days, part of whatever life he was building there. He told the stranger the horse was welcome to stay as long as it wanted, and he would make sure it never faced harm again. The stranger's shoulders relaxed as if a burden had finally been lifted. He said he would head east the next morning, but before he left, he wanted to help repair the back fence where he had left tracks earlier. He offered to bring food supplies from a nearby town as a small repayment for the care the farmer had given the horse. The farmer agreed, grateful for the help and understanding the man's sincerity. The next day, the three of them worked quietly in the early sun. The horse rested near the stable, watching as the stranger and farmer fixed the fence posts and cleared the fallen branches. The land seemed lighter, as if the tension from past days had finally faded. Birds returned to the trees, and the wind carried a softer tone through the grass. When the fence was done, the stranger knelt beside the horse one last time. He thanked it for surviving, for holding on long enough to be found again. The horse lowered its head, brushing lightly against the man's shoulder. The farmer stood nearby, taking in the simple moment. It felt like closure for everyone involved, as if an old chapter was finally ready to end. The stranger loaded his small pack and prepared to leave. Before he stepped onto the main path, he told the farmer that the horse had chosen its place. He said animals had a way of finding what they needed, even after years of hardship. The farmer watched as the stranger walked away, becoming smaller as he moved between the tall trees. The horse let out a soft sound, not of fear or sadness, but something close to gratitude. In the days that followed, life settled into a peaceful rhythm. The horse gained more strength, its coat shining brighter in the sun. It followed the farmer around the yard, not out of fear, but trust. The farmland felt fuller, as if the horse brought something with it that the land had been missing. A sense of purpose grew in the farmer as he cared for it. The work felt meaningful, and the days felt steady. People in town occasionally asked about the old black horse, surprised to hear how well it was recovering. The farmer always answered with a calm smile. He never shared all the details, only saying the horse was finally where it belonged. Visitors noticed the peaceful way the horse stood by the fence, watching the fields as if it had found something worth staying for. Weeks passed, then months. The valley changed with the seasons, but the bond between the farmer and the horse stayed strong. They walked the fields each morning and rested in the cool shade each afternoon. The horse no longer showed signs of fear or restlessness. Its eyes held a quiet strength, a reminder of everything it had survived. The farmer often found himself thinking about how the horse had transformed his days. He realized it had arrived at a time when his own life felt uncertain and empty. Caring for the horse had given him something he didn't know he needed. A sense of connection, of responsibility, and of hope. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and spread gold across the fields, the farmer leaned against the fence while the horse grazed nearby. The air felt warm, and the land stretched out around them in peaceful silence. He looked at the horse and felt grateful for the strange path that had brought them both together. The horse lifted its head and walked toward him, stopping at his side. He placed a hand on its neck, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath its coat. The moment was simple, but it carried a quiet truth. Both of them had found something they needed. A fresh start, a place to heal, and a life worth living. And so the story of the old black horse, once forgotten and wandering from place to place, came to rest on land where it was finally safe. The farmer found meaning in the care he offered, and the horse found peace after years of struggle. Together they shaped a life built on trust, quiet days, and the understanding that even the hardest paths can lead to new beginnings.